Good afternoon, and welcome everyone here to First Unitarian Church. I'm Tom Dishrud, and I'm one of the ministers of this congregation. We gathered together on this summer afternoon to honor and to celebrate the life of Arthur Cadwallader Ellis. Most of us knew him as Hugh. We knew him as husband and as father. We knew him as grandfather and as great-grandfather. We knew him as friend, as teacher, as author, as poet, as musician, as humorist. Hugh died on December the 26th at the age of 82, and we've had a little time since then to take in the reality of his death. So as we gather here today, let us mark his death, yes, but most of all, let us gather here to celebrate a remarkable life. May this gathering be a place to bring our sorrow, yes, but most of all, a place to bring our gratitude and thanks and our love. And may that love and gratitude help us and hold us as we say goodbye and as we come together here. Will you join me now in a moment of prayer as we come together? Spirit of life and of love, be with us as we remember Hugh. We come here united in grief, but most of all united in gratitude for having had Hugh in our lives for this time. In this celebration of his life, let us make a space to remember the stories, our memories, our sorrow. Let us remember the things that he taught us, his way of being in the world. Hugh was his own person. He was his own solo singer. He was his own solo dancer. And we come together to join our sorrow, but also to recognize how we were all part of his song, all part of his life. May love ground us as we come together here to share his story, our memories, his life, and may we carry all of that forward in our own living. Be with us now as we come together to celebrate a life and to give thanks. Blessed be, and amen. We're going to begin with some remembrances now. Gwen, I think you're going to be first, and you're welcome to speak from this pulpit. There's also a floor microphone if that's easier, so everyone can hear. Gwen.
Fortunate for him to get here in a moment. I am Gwen. I'm Hugh's cousin. His father, Arthur, and my mother were brother and sister. And we also had, among that family, we had two cousins from Seattle, from another uncle, and then Art Ellis, Hugh's father, was one of 5 siblings. And so the name Cadwallader goes way back, and it appears in multiple family names. Cadwallader was our grandfather who immigrated from Wales and came to this country and married a Welsh girl, and so therefore they had the 5 children. So my memories were of very early ages, way back when we were first born, really. And so he was the California cousin, we had the Seattle cousins, and my brother Larry and I grew up in Eugene. Well, we had the distances, and so it wasn't often that we got to travel back and forth between everyone. So some early memories were always the ones where when Hugh's father was on leave from the military, then he would be able to come back to see his parents on the farm in Ashland. And Ashland was the gathering spot for most of the family gatherings, because Seattle was a ways, Eugene was a ways, and so they met in the middle, pretty much. So those days that Hugh and I remember were the ones on the farm. It was a small farm in Ashland that had the barn and cows and the creek and the willow tree that we spent a lot of time trying to dam up the creek and trying to play house in the willows and hide and seek all over the farm. And then there was a huge English Tudor home there, and it had about 5 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. And so the grandparents always had room for us when we went to stay there because of all this huge house. And I think Hugh and I remember multiple times racing up the front stairway, down the back stairway, around the house, and all over the place. Mostly in the winter time when we met at Christmas time or Thanksgivings, it was in the house, and at summer times, it was the outside fun. And so in this house, there was the stairway, of course, but there was this banister. And as I recall, I think Hugh held the record for the banister slide, for sure. And so we would get together on those occasions when the whole family and the aunts and the uncles came. It was a family of 18, and so the big house served us well with 18. And then after we started school, we didn't get to see each other so much. And then during the middle school and high school years, we probably saw less of each other. But on the occasions we did go to Palo Alto, and in Hugh's house was a big house with, as my brother remembers, Hugh's room was full of electronic. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know whether it was records or recording or music or just a lot of stuff. And then we had fun outside in the treehouse, and I recall. And then sometimes they would come to Eugene, and we would have fun outside because we were an outside family. The camping trips were a little interesting in that Hugh's family was not much of camping, and the Oregon people were, and so we made short work of camping trips for sure. But we do remember then in the middle years of Hugh's life and high school, I was delighted that he wrote the books that he did. And the shenanigans were great stories. I remember some of them. And so he was one of my favorite cousins, and we always had fun together. And so we finally got to see Hugh off to college. He came, I think, by bus to my parents' house, and we took him to Willamette University. And he enrolled as an English major while he was at Willamette. And then after this first year, I think you can read the rest, that he moved on to Berkeley. And I'll let some other family members share that. But definitely lots of wonderful, great memories of a very favorite cousin.
Dais, I guess you call it, so I can fumble with this book here. Now, I'm not sure quite how to position this. Is this about right? Okay. Well, I thought I might, I'm not a family member, and I thought my only distinction that allowed me or resulted in my being chosen as a speaker was that I've known Hugh longer than anybody else here, but that turns out not to be true. There's Gwen and one or two others to go back even farther. I first met Hugh when, not long after my family moved from other parts to Palo Alto, and it ended up that Hugh and I were only about 2 houses away from each other. And also, we, in the 9th grade, at what would have normally been at Palo Alto High, but at that time it was in Jordan Junior High, we ended up working on the school newspaper, which was kind of a lark, and we had a lot of fun and indulged some of our goofy adolescent humor, which I won't get into, but actually at that time, as Hugh and I got acquainted, which we did very quickly, we kind of took some kind of a shine to each other. He seemed at that time to me a very serious guy, and we shared a lot about classical music. We kind of educated each other in that realm. But as he developed, he became much more open and freer and, I don't know, lighthearted, I think. I think he really evolved as a human being in the years I knew him, as far as I could judge. Well, many years later, we ended up in Berkeley together. For a while, we were roommates, and we had some good times. By that time, we were kind of exploring jazz together. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything I want to recall from those years. Maybe not too much, just that we had a lot of fun and got to know a lot of people and had a group of friends that we had. Well, we were definitely, I want to go back just a point. In high school, we became part of an intellectual group. Yeah, I want to mention this. This is a very personal part. I was a very lonely kid for reasons I won't get into, but like most of us, I had a kind of dysfunctional family. And looking back many years later, I realized that the first time I really felt like I had people I could talk to and who could talk back to me and we could understand each other was when I moved to Palo Alto. And I met Hugh, and I met a mutual friend of ours, Seth Hill, who I think is not longer so connected with either of us. But Hugh and I have stayed connected all these years. So I realized then for the first time I felt like I belonged in somewhere. With some group of people. And Hugh and Seth and I began to call each other the Three. We were the Three. We were pretty full of ourselves in those days, so we thought we were really special, So, and I've kept in touch with Hugh since and seen him marry and have his family and have come up to visit here many times, and he's come to visit me sometimes down in various towns where I've lived in cities, including Sacramento. But I think what I want to do mainly here is I want to read a slightly condensed version of one of the stories in this marvelous little book, which I recommend to all of you. I think it may still be available through Amazon, and it's called Shenanigans, a memoir of pointlessly driving around in cars. And I love the cover that Hugh's son Ben did for this, because he really got Hugh in the seat next to the driver and this crazy guy named Nick Gins driving the car, and that old green Pontiac that Nick had. And it's all very recognizable in the picture on the front of this cover. So you could call this the caper of the disappearing house numbers. And I'm just going to read it, but skipping a few parts so I won't take too long here. During school vacation, on long summer days, my friends and I would try a variety of ways to pass the time. And some of those ways could even be constructive. You can only drive around looking for excitement and playing the radio for so long, and then you really have to come up with something better. Of course, there was always mowing lawns for $1 an hour, which would pay for Cokes and miniature golf. But mowing lawns is a solitary and repetitive business. A more popular activity is hanging out with your friends, but that can end up just being bored together instead of being bored separately. So that is where we would usually start coming up with ideas. In general, as you know, some ideas do not lead to successful actions. We call these bad ideas. Oh, I just have to add this comment. What I hope you'll pick up on is how sly his humor became. And you can kind of hear the winks and the nods, and may have been there when in the original events, but they were certainly there in the recollection and the telling, which I'm sharing with you now. My friend Nick Gins was well known for coming up with bad ideas, and he came up with one. "Let's go over by Cubberley and meet some girls," he said, and this was met with silence. Cubberley was Palo Alto's other high school in those days, and a rival. Meeting girls sounded good, but meeting their boyfriends, not so much. Pete had a better idea. Pete said, "Hey, there are people who go from door to door and use stencils to spray paint house numbers on the curb. I think they charge $1 for each house for that, and it only takes a minute or so." Grins all around. This was the best idea yet, and it would not involve much time or effort at all, so we mobilized. Alan, that was me in those days, I went by my middle name. Alan had an idea for Nick, who was hopeless at doing anything mechanical. "Hey, Nick, you look like 16 going on 40. This was because Nick always had a tie, or at least a sports jacket. "Why don't you bring along a clipboard and a pen, and people will figure you are our boss." Nick loved this idea since it involved a little bit of deception, and besides, it was easy duty. Pete and Alan, Pete is another mutual friend from high school, went home and put on some jeans in case they spilled paint, and my job was to get the paint. There were 2 or 3 cans of paint that were still made a sloshing sound out in the garage, and I had to reject brown and blue colors but one of the cans was labeled white paint, and when I opened it with a screwdriver, it was about half full. There was some dried paint I had to skim off, but with that done, I was able to stir the paint with the screwdriver, so that was good. Let's see. We had pieces of cardboard and scissors, but there wasn't much agreement on the size and shape of the numbers. The results of our number painting would have been very original, but probably unreadable. My mother was delighted to hear about our project and, as usual, called us all geniuses for thinking of it. She took me over to the Miller paint store and found some stencils we could use. They were a little fancier than what we had in mind. There were some little curlicues and leaves on the edge of each stencil, and they were expensive. I think she had to pay about $5 for the set, but she said that was her contribution and we would not have to pay her back. Once we had a mission and equipment, we set off in Nick's car. We wanted to avoid neighborhoods near where we lived to avoid being recognized. And as we found out, many neighborhoods already had their address numbers on the curb. Finally, we settled on a newer development on the other side of Rinconada Park where the curbs were all sloped up from the street. Nick stayed in the car looking officious, and I went to the first door. No one answered my ring, and the same thing was true of the next house. At the third house, a nice lady came to the door. She was hard of hearing. "What did you say, young man? You want to paint our curb?" On repetition, she got the idea and said it would be fine. She wasn't sure about the $1, but it turned out she had one in the kitchen, and she even gave it to us first, so we were good to go. Pete was really careful with the first one and lightly dipped the tip of the brush in the paint so the paint wouldn't run. The result looked pretty good. The nice lady walked out to the street and peered at our new number, and she was delighted. "Now they will have no trouble finding our house," she said encouragingly. I wondered who they were, but we waved to her in appreciation, and she did the same to us. We went on to the next house. We did this for 2 or 3 hours. Got lost there for a second. More than once, like 2 times or 3 fours. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I see what I did. Forget that part. Okay, we did this for 2 or 3 hours until everybody was getting tired and hungry, so we quit for the day. That evening, my father found out what I had been doing because my mother couldn't resist blurting it out. She was so proud of our initiative. She probably thought that my father would be pleased, but as usual, he was not. He didn't complain, really, but he did raise his eyebrows and purse his lips, as if to say, "Why is my son wasting his time with these such lightweight schemes?" He was a retired Marine Corps colonel, and I always expected him to say something stern, although he seldom did. After dinner, some clouds moved in and it rained during the night. But in the morning, the sun came out and it was dry and sunny again. About 11, the streets were, about 11, sorry, I lost my place. Oh, we drove back to the neighborhood where we had been painting numbers. It was a bit difficult finding the exact area where we had stopped the night before or even where we had started. We couldn't see any sign of numbers where we were standing. Alan, that's me, looked at Nick. "Nick, you should have been writing down the numbers on each street we did so we could keep track." Nick looked a little insulted. "No one said that was part of my job. Besides, we know exactly how many numbers we did because we have exactly $31. "Okay, then tell us where we stopped. All these houses look pretty much the same, and I don't see any curb numbers on this block at all." The block we were on did look pretty familiar. It was part of Glenda Street, and the trees looked familiar too. Suddenly, a really bad feeling came over me. I went behind Nick's car and opened the trunk to check the paint can. I walked sadly back to my friends who were ready to start the day's work. "Gentlemen," I said, "I am sorry to tell you this, and it is my fault." "Fault for what?" said Pete. "What's wrong, Hugh?" I shook my head. "What's wrong is that the paint we used was water-based paint. And it rained last night, rained hard." My former friends stared at me open-mouthed. "Well," said Pete, "I think we ought to get the hell out of here." We did that sheepishly. I don't think any of us ever again ventured onto Glenda Street or the other streets around Glenda. I know I didn't. Out of sight, out of mind. You might ask me why we didn't return the $31. We never planned to cheat anybody, after all. Well, first, we hadn't made a list of the houses. That was dumb. Second, the neighborhood was unfamiliar and the houses were pretty similar. Third, we probably could have found some of the right houses and just endured the shame and embarrassment that would go along with giving back each dollar bill. But frankly, if you were going to feel shame and embarrassment anyway, why not do it in the comfort of home? Now, I just have to tell you as a note of honesty, I have no doubt that events like this actually occurred, but I have no personal memory of them at all.
Howdy, folks. I have a little bit of voice issues, so I hope I'm understandable. I am both honored and humbled and unprepared for the fact that I'm listed on the program. So this is kind of a collage of thoughts over the last few days as I thought about coming up here. I'm the next part of Hugh's life, probably from this period. My name's Trip Mikic, and Hugh was my high school English teacher in Placerville. Let me set the context for this. Placerville is a deeply red county, El Dorado County in California. It's one of the most conservative counties in California. And Hugh showed up at Ponderosa High School as the word went around the high school as this guy from Berkeley. And at that time, there was a small part of that world in Placerville of people who were talking, and Marcia and I couldn't quite pin it down, but it's probably 66, 67. So we're in the midst of the Vietnam War. We're in the midst of a cultural revolution that would upend a lot of assumptions about our country, our culture, about race, ultimately about gender, all of these things. It was the beginning of a huge upheaval following on the civil rights movement and fed by the counterculture. So there were a handful of us who were beginning to turn away from that 50s culture that had dominated so much of the landscape up until that moment. We were interested in what was happening in Vietnam, and we're doing things like chanting, "Hell no, we won't go," at high school football rallies, getting kicked out of school for a couple of weeks. And Hugh appeared in the midst of that moment. Hugh and Marcia, actually, and the kids. And it was pivotal to say who I am today is a result partly of my encounter with Hugh, is not to exaggerate. And I got a chance to say this to him shortly before he died. Can people hear me okay? I know the voice thing gets worse as I talk. So I wound up having Hugh, I think it was a sophomore English class. And what I remember, and memory 50 plus years on, 60 years almost, is a funny thing. It's a pastiche of glimpses of things kind of mixed together, and it's not necessarily a straight up narrative. It's not a straightforward narrative. But the things I remember are him having us listen to a talk that Ken Kesey, the great writer, had made, and Oregon resident, had made at some, I don't know where, but somehow Hugh had a reel-to-reel tape of this talk that Kesey did about writing. And to this day, I still quote part of that tape because I still remember it. There was a line in it where Kesey says, if you want to become a writer, get up every morning and write for 2 hours. Take everything you've written, tear it up, and throw it in the trash can, and do the same thing the next day, and keep doing that. And I still remember that, and I don't quite follow it exactly, but I oftentimes quote that to people. Hugh suddenly opened up the door to this idea that there was a world that we could make, that we didn't have to accept the world as it was, that we could engage the world in a different way and participate in it in a different way. I mean, I remember when Hugh and Marcia and the kids moved back down to Berkeley, I guess a couple years later, and I used to show up at their house in the middle of the night, knock on the door, and ask if they had a place where I could crash. I remember, and again, this is one of those things where you get pieces mixed together, but I remember going to Free Huey demonstrations in San Francisco for Huey, to Free Huey Newton of the Black Panther Party. And I believe that Hugh was there. Marcia's nodding her head. I wasn't sure whether I was there. I know I was there. And luckily there was what I've figured out now is the squad. There were like another English teacher and a couple of art teachers and a counselor. And these people also represented this kind of turning point in the culture. And so I would literally get rides with them down to things like demonstrations in San Francisco and Berkeley and things like this. So Hugh was an essential part of that. I mean, Hugh gave me Allen Ginsberg and Howell. Hugh gave me the Kesey thing, which I mentioned. Hugh had us debate the Vietnam War in his classroom. And, you know, for those of us, which was a very small group of us in this very, very conservative high school, that legitimized our belief that the world needed to change. It legitimized our sense of our own being, of our own autonomy to make change in the world and not accept it the way it was. And that's a profound gift that I still carry with me today, because I still believe the world needs changing. And Hugh was part of the big reason that gave me permission to continue with that in my life. I wrote down a bunch of words here when I was trying to think about Hugh and the kinds of things I think about him that come up. And the words I wrote were like refuge, trust, music, humor, continuation, friendship, equality. These are all things that I feel when I think of Hugh. I mean, to be 15, 16 years old and being treated as an autonomous human being with a mind of your own, capable of looking at the world and making important decisions about how you will engage it, is a powerful gift. And Hugh, I have to believe to this day that Hugh probably gifted that to a lot more people than myself. I have a feeling there's a whole bunch of folks out there over the years that have come in contact with Hugh in various ways, especially as students, who to this day carry that gift with them. I'm going to end with just a short personal story. It's very short. When my mother died, I had been living and spent a lot of time living in Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. I've been spending a lot of time in Thich Nhat Hanh's communities and helped build a couple of them in the United States. And when my mother died, I went to Thich Nhat Hanh and I asked him, I said, could you write something, because Thai, as we called him, teacher, it's an honorific. I forgot to mention Subud, by the way. Subud was another part of the world of Hugh. It was like the fact that there was this other part that you could also look at that wasn't just about books and intellect. So I went to Thich Nhat Hanh and I asked him, I said, would you honor my mother, and write a calligraphy, because Thich Nhat Hanh did really beautiful calligraphy in Vietnamese and English. And I didn't know what he would do with it. I wrote it out. I wrote a thing out on a piece of paper and handed it to him one morning at breakfast at the monastery. And the next day I was working on moving some beds after a retreat, putting them up on some shelves and stuff. And he walked in with this big coat, because he was very frail and he got cold very easy, so he was wearing this big heavy coat, and it was winter in New York, upper state New York. And he walks in, he starts like he's gonna take off his coat, and I'm worried he's gonna try to help us, because he did that a lot. He would try to help you, saw you working. And I thought, no, I know. I said, no, don't do that, Ty. And he pulls this piece of paper out of his pocket, and it says, and he hands it to me, and then he bows and he walks away with his attendant. And I open up the piece of paper, and on it he's done this calligraphy it's for a memorial stone for my mother, right? And on it is this piece of calligraphy that says, Mother, you continue well in me. And so I just want to say to Hugh that, Hugh, you continue well in me today. Thank you.
I got notes. I need notes. Who knows where this would go if I didn't have notes? Before I even get started talking about Hugh, I want to talk about this amazing Ellis family. To this day, I still talk about Hugh and Marcia as the original hippies. I mean, their door is open, and they have taken in and been with so many people, and it's just wonderful to have seen over these years. At times I'm going like, what are they doing now? But these people are here, and they have grown up, and they have been loved, and that's the important thing. I first met Hugh in 1985 at Marshall High School. He and I were both resource room teachers, and that we had separate classrooms, and we had a great team of people in the special ed department. Everything worked real well. Hugh had been there for 2 years before I got there, and so he knew what was going on and who you could work with and who you couldn't work with. So it made my start quite easy. He was, a mentor. I would go into his classroom between classes if I needed something, or if it was my prep and I needed to go into class. Between classes, Hugh would rearrange the seating for each class. He'd move the desks, he'd take the desks, and he'd be moving them over here and then over here and over here. And I said, well, why, you do this all the time. He says, yeah. I said, well, why? And it's like, well, these two were working on this, and they get along together. And these three are working on this, and they get along together. And Tommy over here, he doesn't get along with anybody, so he's sitting over here. But being a resource room teacher means you're teaching several different things at the same time. You're not just teaching English all period. You might be working with one group working on their English in another classroom. You might be working with another group who's working on their history. You may be teaching math. You may be teaching writing. You may be teaching spelling. It just depends on the situation of the student. So it was a real machine. I mean, Hugh and I worked there for several years. I got transferred, not transferred, but I got reassigned in the building to become the behavior teacher after a couple of years. And so I did that for about 5 years, and then I needed to change my behavior. It was trying, but it was fun. So then I went off somewhere. I don't even know where I'm at here in Comasika. Oh, I will tell you, yeah, he was one of the most intelligent people I ever met. It's 1985. We're using these old Commodore 64s and stuff like that, and he's writing code for assignments. He's writing code. I'm just found out what code was, and I still don't quite understand it. A lot of X's and a lot of O's, I know that much. But here he was, he would do that to make the assignments, individual assignments for his students. His love of language, he was just so much fun. I mean, with that wit, that dry, wonderful wit of his, and laced with a little sarcasm and irony that you could just pick up on here and there. And I think you said it real well about how it's in there. He knows what he's doing in his writing, so it was very, very special. The words he'd like the archaic words, obscure words, humorous words, silly sounding words. I've learned so much about stuff with him. He loved music, and I did too. And he's a person who turned me on to jazz. I mean, I had heard some, mostly the mainstream jazz, Dave Brubeck type stuff like that, but he got me into Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and Mose Allison, and people like that, and it just really opened some doors for me. And we would hang out together, and, we became friends, and we'd do the same thing with literature, with books. We'd share books and talk about them with each other. And after a while, we started playing music together, and I had never played the guitar before. And Hugh helped me get started. Marcia was helping me get started too. We had a fun time, and for about the next 10 years, we would jam on Wednesday nights. And I hear that you're going to be subject to some of that music. I apologize already. We had fun, but we were never very good. One of the most memorable, we would go to any Bob Dylan show that was within 100 miles or so. So we went to several of them. I tried to count them all, at least 8 or 9. First we went with the wives, but they got their fill of Bob Dylan after a couple of concerts, so we didn't have to do that anymore. And one of the most memorable ones was Hugh and I, we took off and went up to George on the Gorge, the venue up there. If you've never been there, it's really something. It's an amphitheater that overlooks the Columbia, and it's about 5-hour drive to get there. So we went to that Dylan show there, and it was Van Morrison and Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan. And so we camped and took my van, and we stayed in the van. And I mean, we were like at the happening. We might have been the oldest people at the happening, but we were there. So that was great. Somewhere along the line, I got the bright idea that I wanted to be an administrator in Portland schools. And of course, I didn't want to take all those classes by myself, so, hey, Hugh, how about you and I? We go to night school at Portland State, and we go have something to eat before, and maybe we'll have to have a beer afterwards to talk about what the class was about, stuff like that. So anyway, here we are, going to school, working all day, going to school at night, working on our administrator's credentials. I look back at it and I think, maybe that wasn't such a good choice. Maybe that was not a great choice. He was happy being a teacher. He was a good teacher. And people loved him for it. And I kind of said, drug him along with me. It wasn't too much of an argument, but looking back, I just wonder if that would have been better. So we got our credentials and became administrators. Hugh became the assistant director of special education for Portland Public Schools. And things were going along nicely until our director left, our buddy who we followed for years and worked very well with. And he was replaced by she who will not be named. And so things kind of started going downhill from there, administration-wise. Hugh had an accident on the weekend where I think he hurt his hip. He had hurt his hip out walking the dog in the park, or knee. So anyway, one of those joints. And so he was out of work for a while. Well, with this new director wanted people like, take a bullet for me, okay? Would you take a bullet for me? That kind of thing. And it's anyway, she kind of talked Hugh into retiring. So, he was out for a while. It's a very, very busy, very, the type of job is very difficult. So he retired, and I felt kind of funny about that. I just thought, that just wasn't right. And then so he started at Portland State training future administrators and special ed started. I think he started with special education teachers and then moved up to administration. And he seemed to really like that. He would, had go around to different schools and monitor what they were doing and help them with it, and also teaching classes. And I think that was very nice for him. Instead of being administrator, I resigned my position. Thank you, Stacy, and did another job for the rest of my career. But we always, we stayed in touch. We continued to play music on a regular basis, and that was fun. We had a small group, and that was just something we did in a regular routine. And as you know, and then COVID came. When we go out Hugh and I'd go out to lunch and stuff like that, and then COVID came and things kind of slowed down, and then, life started taking its way with us, as it does, and that continued to slow us down too, so we weren't getting together as much as we used to. And I was fortunate enough to have lunch with him right before Christmas. Betty Zambrano and I had lunch with him, and it was very nice for us to get that in. I was surprised when he passed. It was just didn't seem right. The man is so full of life and energy, and such a good human being. I mean, in Yiddish, one of the highest compliments you can give a person is call him a mensch. And he was a mensch, and that just means a good person. And that's what Hugh was. He was kind, intelligent, understanding. He did humorous. Everything has been said, and I'll say it again, but I really miss the guy, and he will always be with me. And thank you.
Hello. If anybody doesn't know, I'm Benjamin. I'm Hugh's oldest son. But I'm going to read off this page. Our friend Mike Beckett couldn't make it today, but he wrote this, so I'm reading it. I am the stand-in for Mike Beckett. My name is Mike Beckett, and I'm grateful, despite my regrettable absence today, to share some words in honor of Hugh, who I met 46 years ago as a first-year teacher as part of a county-run school program serving so-called delinquent populations of mainly adolescent, middle, and high school-aged males. I will not detail my initial apprehensions other than to say that despite the obvious associations set to this category of students, the real challenge of working had to do with addressing a student readiness level involving high levels of district truancy and attendance, along with mixed age, ability, credit, and grade levels, unidentified special education needs, and occasional bad attitudes. Given this reality, the standard advice I received was to assess individual transcripts and then assign individualized lessons for each individual student. But then about halfway through my first year, I was made aware of this teacher, Hugh Ellis, and his distinctive, some said theatrical, approach in the face of the previously mentioned academic challenges. Since we worked at different sites, I must add that my initial introduction was via the observations and admirations of our colleagues. No small feat, given the general independent nature of many teachers in general. Hugh's approach was to create group-oriented lessons around real-time solutions he invented involving skill-based solutions requiring written and vocabulary-based exercises. When I finally had a chance to sit in for fun, what stood out at the very onset was Hugh's distinctive wit. Amazing to witness these tough Oakland kids interacting, enjoying this very droll and amusing instructor from another planet. His students picked it up. Hugh's independence and creativity provided the framework for my classroom. His inspiration saved me. About 6 or so years after we met, Hugh and Marcia decided to leave for Portland, but we'd become friends and I remained in contact, largely through music, During his final years in the Bay Area, I met some musician friends of his. As eclectic as Hugh, and we would have gigs together. After he moved to Portland, we'd make a point of creating and sharing mixed, yes, cassette tapes. And of course, his novels never deviating from his wonderful deadpan tone and point of view. He was creative, and witnessing his ever-expanding family upon sporadic visits, committed as an educator and loving husband, father, and grandfather his entire life. Thank you, Hugh. We are coming close to the end of our first hour here. I just have a few quick words to say. My dad was a great dad. He was really, when I was little, he took me fishing and he took me camping, and he was not particularly good at those things, but that's what fathers do with their sons. So he took me fishing and he took me camping. One day he said, "Ben, why don't you skip school tomorrow and we'll go ride roller coasters?" And I said, I'm fully behind this idea, Dad. So we went to Marriott's Great America and rode roller coasters all day and ate junk food until we got sick. And it was one of the best days of my youth. He loved music. He loved stereophonic sound. He taught me the nature of stereo by putting a headset on me and then having two microphones. He said, like, "I'm walking into Ben's ear. Oh, now I'm in the middle of his head. Now I'm in his other ear." And as a kid with the headphones on, I was like, "Oh my God, he is in my head. How did he do that?" And he taught me how to wire up speaker lines and splice wires together, and I helped him set up his stereo. But I used that technology some years later to bug my sister's room. I had a broken cassette deck, but it did work as an amplifier, and I put headphones on it, and I spliced about 30 foot of wire to go down the laundry chute, along the ceiling of the basement, up the outside wall, and through a broken window in my sister's room. So I would get in my closet and put on the headset and collected very valuable information. For instance, Judy at school was mean. However, Scott Baio was cute. There was other stuff. I probably should have written it down. It's lost to the ages now. In any case, I was inevitably discovered, and I recall my mother very sternly lecturing me on privacy and respect. And I remember my father standing behind her, looking a little proud. And the last thing is, my dad came to New Orleans to visit me some years ago, and we went and got a swamp tour and went to restaurants, but most of the week was spent sitting at my kitchen table, eating steak and bacon, drinking cheap wine over ice, and laughing and laughing and laughing. He went on for like 3 days about his dream to heal the wounds and overcome the past differences between us and our neighbors in Canada. The idea was to build a bridge to Canada as a symbol of our unity. I said, "That is an excellent idea, Dad. We totally need to move forward on this." It was very funny the first day. It really just got funnier on the third day, the fourth day. Anyway, my dad was funny as hell. And my dad was a really good dad and a really good grandpa and a fair to middling husband, right? I mean, he gave you some grief, but he pulled it off, basically, you know. Anyway, I'm going to miss him for the rest of my life. And thank you for coming to honor him today. I do think we just have a few more minutes, but is there someone else who wants to speak? Okay, you can do it, girl. My lovely sister, Rebecca.
I didn't realize it was going to be hard until I got here. This room brings me some memories. I was here about 17 years ago, almost to the day. memorializing my husband. And Dad was here, of course. And so when I walked in today, I was carefree and feeling pretty good until I walked in. And so forgive me, a little more emotional than I thought I'd be. But some things I wanted to point out, I know we're short on time. Just that my dad, as you all said, was such a wonderful human. And we all were able to learn from him and model ourselves after him and after that, and teach it to our children. My notes go on for probably 4 pages. People told me just make some bullet points and then pick like the first, top 5. Well, I couldn't pick. So it's good that you all did. And it makes me feel really good that he's remembered the same way I feel about him. 2 of the most important men in my life have now died. And I've looked forward to this day. I needed some closure for Pop. And Dad handed down music and humor and intellect and patience and love and kindness. And he did have a few moments where he was the discipline guy, but it just made you respect him a little bit more. I'm so grateful that you're all here, and I'm sorry I can't say more. Hopefully afterwards I'll pull myself together and we'll be able to talk about all the things I want to say and think that you should know about him. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'll talk to you later, and thank you everybody for coming.
I'll be brief. Glad to see all of you here. You've heard that my dad was a cool dad. He's an understanding dad, and that is all very true. You all know that, I think. When I was, 12, he started taking me to R-rated movies. RoboCop and 48 Hours. But my favorite story about my dad that I like to tell people is when I was 14, I decided I had to have this new album that was out. It was one of the first albums with the parental advisory sticker on it. It was a cassette album by a group called Two Live Crew. As nasty as they want to be. It was very, very inappropriate. But I did a lot of dumb things as a kid, and I brought that tape home, and one day me and my friend are helping Dad with weeding in the yard, and I'm just blasting this tape on the front porch. My dad was out there working with us. He didn't notice until he went to head inside to use the bathroom, and he stopped. He listened for a second, and he just took the tape out, looking kind of disappointed. And I ran up. I said, Dad, no, it's going to be a collector's item. See the sticker on it and everything. You have to give it back to me when I'm 18. He thought about it for a minute. He said, yeah, well, I don't think he actually said anything in that moment, but a couple years later, I was in his closet grabbing something for him and then saw that tape up on the shelf. And it just gave me a warm feeling that he actually thought about that and respected me enough that he was like, yeah, okay, I'll give it back to you when you're 18. I thought that was a real cool dad move. So that's all I really wanted to say.
Are you talking to? Trying to do the outro.
I'm sorry. I just want to say that, I was a difficult kid. I was a difficult teen. I was a difficult adult. I had a lot of demons, and my dad was there for me no matter what, 100%. And I just feel so blessed that I was able to be there with him these last 10, 15 years and spend time. You know, when he had diabetes, he started going to the nail salon because he couldn't do his own toenails. And he enjoyed it so much that he kept doing it. And when he couldn't get out of the house very often, that and going to the grocery store was about all he could do. And I got to spend time with him doing those things. And those are memories that, you know, he touched everybody's life. The last time I went into that nail salon, all they could talk about was my dad. They all loved him. People that, you know, all they ever knew him from was getting his toes done once a month, you know. But everyone loved him, and he's going to be missed. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure there's going to be a couple nuns coming in here and hustling us out the door any minute. So I think we should probably switch over to the reception room, which is right down the hall with some lovely snacks. But Jeffrey and Devin have another piece to play. Is that correct? Is it a dance piece? Can you? Interpretive dance piece. My father was very into interpretive dance, so if anyone wants to interpretive dance throughout this performance. Well, now Mom wants to talk. My job is never done.
I just want to thank everyone for coming. It's clear that Hugh's love for everybody, family and friends, was what we treasured so much. And I think that will never end. And I wanted to quote from the Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. "We ourselves shall be loved for a while and forgotten, but the love we have will have been enough. All those impulses of love return to the love that made them. Even memory is not necessary for love. There's a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridge is love, the only survival, the only meaning." And we can all feel that.